It's Tiffany Lorraine Galloway, certified high performance coach with another episode of the Resilient Mother podcast. Here in March, we're going to be talking about resilient strength, what it takes to build your strength from the inside out so you can be resilient. And today I have Angie with me as my guest. Angie, thank you for being here. Please tell us more about you.
I'm so glad to be here with you. And so I am Angie. I'm the adoption coach. And I came to be an adoption coach because I'm also an adoptive mom. I was a foster mom, have a bio daughter as well. And that's just a little bit about me. I don't know what else you want to know.
Well, I'd be curious to know how you define resilience.
Yeah, so, in raising a child who comes from trauma, I quickly learned how resilient as a mom that I had to be. And to me, resilience means being able to take, the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes with raising kids, and to be able to bounce back and show up as the best version of ourselves, because that's what our kids need from us, especially our kids from trauma. They need us to be able to, kind of put on our big girl pants and get over ourselves and show up for our kids.
I really like that definition, and I like the idea of being resilient to show up for your kids. And we are the adults. They are just children, and they are sponges, and they absorb everything. So it's so important what we say and what we do as an example to them. And I'm assuming that trauma, you're meaning foster children that you've taken under you. But is there also trauma involved with adoption? Like, do those cross over? I'm kind of curious your explanation on some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we now know, science is telling us more and more every day. And even adults who have been through the process are sharing more and more information about how, even in the best of circumstances, when a child is raised in one womb and then lives in a different home, that in and of itself can be traumatic. Right? They're experiencing the sounds of their mom, the hormones of their mom, the environment that mom is in, good, bad, or, not so good, right? But that's the child's life experience. And then when that changes, everything that they know about life, everything that they've experienced in those first, hopefully 9 months, isn't there anymore. And so even in the best circumstances, that can be traumatic. But we also know that more often than not, kids who have been placed for adoption or who are in foster care are experiencing all kinds of traumas, whether it was exposure in the womb to drugs and alcohol or abuse, or the stress hormones of mom, as she might have been experiencing homelessness or abuse. So the child is already experiencing so much trauma early on. And although they might not have thoughts that they can explain to a therapist, it changes the way that their brain is developed, actually, and has a huge impact actually on the way the brain structures develop. So science tells us that the survival parts of the brain end up growing or having denser tissue because they have to. And the parts of the brain that we as humans are unique for, right? The parts that can problem solve and show impulse control and things like that actually don't get as much practice when kids experience trauma. And so as mom, that's what we experience is our kids who we love so much, but they can really struggle with those things that we expect from our kids. We expect them to connect with us. We expect them to listen to us. We expect, we have all these expectations, and those oftentimes are really impacted in kids who've experienced trauma.
It sounds like a child feels safer from being with who they grew into because it's the safety thing. Like, that's what they know. That's their environments. That's their safety. And when you take that safety away, that's the trauma piece that comes out, because it's no matter what, you're getting exposure to something completely new. And before you've even developed the skill to really adapt, though kids are resilient, we do say, they have no way to express what they're feeling or to show it until later years. So I'm really glad to hear this. I'm a birth mom myself, but my child was put up for adoption at 9 months old due to trauma from the father that I left, and then a toxic environment I was trying and attempting to raise a child in that was not working and was not safe. And in my faith, that was kind of the thing that you did, was you gave them their best chance, but it was really hard because I didn't have a lot of support around what I was doing, so that was not helpful, and, actually, I had to do it kind of behind the family's back to make it actually happen, but I asked for some special things because I was worried about that trauma piece. I've been raising this child for 9 months, and I how do I do this? Is this really the right thing to do? I went through the process of picking a couple and really praying about it and deciding if this was the right thing to do, and I felt good about them, but what I didn't feel good about is I could feel there would be that trauma piece. So I actually asked if I could stay with the couple and be there for 2 weeks to help the adjustment. And in my naive 20-year-old, gone through a lot mind, I was hoping that would be enough. But it's pretty clear now from the little bit that I've learned um, about that child since, it still had huge impact over, and it showed up. And actually, a lot of the things I didn't think she would know about how hard it was for me or things I verbalized, I actually found repeated back to me. And so it's
Yeah.
heartening because it's like I had the best of intentions. And when you take on a foster child or your adoptive parent, you they prepare you somewhat for that with all of the preparation that you're allowed to be an adoptive or a foster parent. But I think it could be a little disheartening if you don't realize that there's that work there. But I think there's also hope. So we've talked about the trauma side of it. Can you talk about the hope side of it and how you can set kids up for success, even though they may have a trauma piece that's a part of their life?
Yeah, absolutely. And, thank you for sharing your story. I remember we had touched base about that quite some
Yeah.
time ago. And so thanks for the reminder because, um, yeah, I'm so focused on helping adoptive parents that I don't want to say I forget about the bio parents, but, that isn't my focus. And so it's good to hear the other side of it because when you're in that situation, it's hard to know. There isn't a best outcome or not
Right.
best outcome. Like there isn't a perfect answer, right?
No.
But you're so right too, in that kids are so resilient. What I've learned over the past, I don't know, so my son is 18 now. We adopted him when he was 5. So what I've learned over the past 13 years is that the hope comes from very different strategies than what I think is presented to a lot of bio parents and adoptive parents. What's kind of presented out in the world from the experts is, as mom, I was told like he needs a lot of structure and routine. He needs things to be very predictable. He needs clear consequences. These are the things that a child who's experienced trauma needs. This is what I was told. And I, followed all of the rules to a T. And I also have a really strong background in behavior management. My career for 20 plus years was in behavior management. And so I went into parenting him thinking like I can handle any behavior. And of course I adopted him because I wanted to provide him a loving, happy home. But there was definitely a disconnect in my approach and what I find with a lot of other adoptive parents, because kids who've experienced this disrupted attachment, it isn't just behaviors that we see as parents, right? I talked about like their impulse control is impacted and problem solving and language processing can be really impacted, right? Those can be frustrating for any parent when you have a kiddo who's bright, they're bright, but you give simple instructions and they don't follow through. Or you give them an instruction, they do the complete opposite of what you ask, right? Like that can drive
Mhm.
any parent
Yeah.
crazy. But what is so unique to kids who've experienced disrupted attachment is this innate drive. It's not a thought, but this innate drive to test whether or not the new parents are going to love them.
Yeah.
And as mom, it hurts so much, right? Like I many of us adoptive moms have given all of our love, all of our time, all of our resources sometimes to trying to help this child have a happy home. And then the child is doing the complete opposite of what we would expect of our children, right? They're pushing us away, telling us how much they hate us and you're not my mom and just send me back. And can't you just find me a new foster family? And all of these things that really hit us where it hurts.
Yeah.
um, but right, you said let's talk about the positive. So what I learned though is that those approaches about managing the behaviors isn't at all what our kids need. And what they really need us is to have really clear tools to show up with unconditional love. and not just
Mm,
in our words, not just in our action, but in our belief,
mm,
right? Because I was doing, my son's therapist would often say, just tell him when he's acting out, just say, I love you no matter what. I love you no matter what. So I was doing that, right? And my son called me out on my bluff. He was like, whatever, you're going to get rid of me eventually, anyways, if I just try hard enough. Those are the words that my son would say. I'm not saying that to blame him, right? He was scared. But while I was saying those words, I didn't believe myself because I was terrified that it wasn't going to work, that I couldn't love him enough. And so, what I know now is that, and I learned this from working with a mindset coach, but what I know now is that I needed to work on my belief so that he could trust me. Because you
mm.
hit the nail on the head before. When a child isn't with their bio parent anymore, it's actually that sense of safety that creates all of the kind of ripple effect of behaviors and problems, and all of it comes from that sense of safety. And so, my son, for example, and most of the families that I've met now, is that he lost his sense of safety when he left his bio mom. He was in our home, and I'm trying so hard to love him, but because I didn't have a strong enough belief that this was going to work, because the behaviors were really hard, because I didn't believe it, his how do I say this? Like, his safety radar was like, Mayday, Mayday, this might not work.
Yeah,
Because he,
you could feel it.
yeah,
Yeah.
kids are instinctual, and
Mhm.
we know that kids who've experienced trauma have an even heightened sense of that instinct
Oh, yeah.
because of the trauma they've experienced. And so he knew more than I knew, which is wild. But so that's where the hope is knowing exactly how to believe that you unconditionally love your child, no matter how they behave, what they say, what they do. That really is where the hope lies.
And I think love really is the answer kind of all around because in my situation, being a birth parent, not really planning on it. I was married. I thought I was going to be able to raise this child, and then not having the right support or environment to do so led to the adoption, but also later led to a major fallout with mental health with me because the outcome from what was supposed to be an open adoption kind of turned into a closed adoption. I won't go into all the details, but it just did not turn out the way I had seen it promised or that I had hoped. And so it really negatively affected me with lack of support. But I also didn't know how to ask for it because it was still the older mentality of adoption of like, oh, just forget about it, don't talk about it. I'd raised a child for 9 months. How am I going to just forget that and act like it didn't happen? And then I would date or do different things, and that would come up, and people would feel deceived that I was not honest about being divorced and already experiencing those things. But yet I was supposed to be applauded for being a birth parent and doing the right thing. And so it created all these contradictions about what family would look like, who would love me, how a traditional family in the future would be. So that's one piece of being a birth mom that I'm sure you work through, and I'd love to discuss that. The other piece was everyone's like, oh, when you get remarried and you have another kid, you'll be fine. It'll fix everything. And I had my second child and a lot of joy. But when she reached 9 months, there was all this grief and sorrow that came up from giving up my first child. At that point, oh, I'm going to get a little emotional. And so it was this bittersweet thing of, yes, now I get to be mom, but what did I lose?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how did that affect my child? I didn't even know at the time. And I also had this picture of when they turn 18, we're going to have this great relationship and we're going to finally be able to spend time together and we're going to bond and we're going to fix it, right? Like that's the other thing that you start thinking and hoping for as a birth parent when it doesn't quite go the way that you hope.
Yeah.
I'm connected, but not connected. I
Yeah.
once in a while get to say I love you, but I'm not involved. I'm really just not in the picture in a way that I thought I would be. And so there's a lot of feelings around that I don't think anyone understands that are still there. They think, oh, you fixed the problem, it's done. Like that's not how it works. It's unnatural to be separated from your child. It's
Yeah.
just not it from what you're saying, it's proving it even more in science that there are consequences that are pretty can be pretty severe from separating from a child. I mean, I think at birth they think, oh, they were in the womb, they don't know. Like there's all of, I think, these misconceptions that we can hit on in this discussion. So I'd love
Yeah.
to
Oh, yeah.
dive into that.
Oh, they know. I mean, I realize this is anecdotal. I don't know if there's a science at some point, technology will catch up, but anecdotally, there's our story after story after story from adults who hadn't even been adopted, but felt this sense of rejection their entire life, and find out later on in life that their mom had contemplated adoption or
Oh,
abortion,
wow.
and to have that be explained. I even have a friend who, um, uh, uh, through DNA testing, like Ancestry or 23andMe or whatever, has so my friend has a sibling. I hope I'm not airing her story, but she has several siblings, but one of the siblings all along, they're adults now, but all along had kind of expressed this like feeling like they didn't fit in, feeling like they didn't fit in. Well, 40 years later, does some DNA testing and finds out that both of their parents aren't actually both of their parents. you
Oh,
know,
wow.
we know that
Mhm.
it is in our DNA, literally.
Yeah. Yeah, I can sense my little guy whose dad's not in the picture. I can see it because I'm hypersensitive to it from all the experiences that I have. That missing piece for him. Even when he was 2 months old, every time he heard a male voice, you could see him looking and seeing if it was the one he matched that he heard in the womb. And when
Yeah,
it wasn't, you could like see this confusion.
yeah,
And it was an interesting thing to pick up on because it's like, okay, well, I'm aware of that now for him. What do I do about it? And what I came up with was understanding that one parent who's very loving and consistent and shows up, like you were talking about, is very important. Well, how did I want to show up? And one of the things I do with him at night is we do an affirmation with his bedtime that I've been saying to him that you are special, you are loved, you are mommy's miracle, you are wanted, those kind of things.
yeah,
And now he says it. All I have to say is you are, and he goes through the whole thing.
yeah,
And he's even turned it on me and said the same thing to me, which has been really, really sweet. But I feel like I'm trying to reprogram some of that trauma with
yeah.
that affirmation just to have it repetitive enough and frequent enough that he knows the opposite of what those feelings might have been, and hopefully that will help along the way. He's also been in a lot of personal development stuff with me over the last 3 years. I'm sure that's helped a lot. He's been on my lap, at the breast, like trained, like, and all those things. But I just wanted to flood him, and during my pregnancy too, just from the trauma in my life, understanding I've got to feed as many positive emotions into my body and into my life and into his life as I possibly can.
Yeah.
But I think you can do all that work too and still have pieces that aren't resolved. And so the work's never quite done. And I think it's important not to get frustrated. So I'm curious about tools and techniques that you use that keep someone encouraged on that path. Because trauma and healing is not linear, I guess would be the way I'd put it. And I'm curious if that's your experience too.
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to touch on what, that strategy that you're using with your son completely taps into what I was saying before about that. You can't just go through the motions of telling, like I was saying, like I was telling my son, I love you no matter what, I'm not going anywhere. But I was missing that belief. But with your son, you are building or have already built his belief in those concepts that you're sharing with him, right? Because I imagine that you believe it also as you're saying it to him, but you're building that belief because we can take all the action we want, but it has to come from the right place.
Yeah.
So jumping off of that and thinking about like how I help adoptive parents. So I really do work on that belief piece. They have to believe what they're doing. It can't just be, it can't just be a fake it till you make it. Of course, we have to kind of start there. We have to start somewhere, but they have to all the while be building their belief. So, well, let me talk about two strategies I use. One is respond versus react. The second one ties into this and makes it more practical. But oftentimes when our kids are acting out, they're, I don't know, like chasing after the dog with a pair of scissors, or they've spread shaving cream all over the bathroom, or they're fighting with their sibling, just pummeling on them for the third time today, right? as parents, we become much more reactive when this is our everyday routine. Our fuse gets shorter. We tend to show up with less and less compassion, and we tend to react to the behavior itself, like stop chasing the dog, or you can't do that with the shaving cream, or look at the mess you made, or we try to teach them. We tend to react to the behavior itself. But what I know about kids with trauma is that a lot of their behaviors come from the trauma, right? They're chasing the dog with the scissors because there's something inside of them that feels unsettled. And I'm not saying that, all kids can have behaviors, correct, but I often tell the families that I'm working with that, like, just humor me. What if we pretend that every one of their behaviors comes from trauma and we respond that way? Because if we as parents are trying to think like, oh, in this moment, they're just misbehaving. Oh, but in this moment, they're coming from trauma, right? Like, how do
Mhm.
we know?
Right.
So I tell the parents to just humor me. Let's just pretend that all of their behaviors come from trauma because we'll respond in a more kind way anyways. So I tell them to ask themselves a key question about, what does my child need from me right now? So they're
Mhm.
chasing the dog with the scissors, and the parents' normal reaction is to yell at them. Of course, grab the scissors, right? Maybe their reaction is to, like, you can't do that, you're going to hurt the dog, or I've already told you this 3 times today, or whatever, right? Chances are parents have their standard reaction. We're all a little different, but nonetheless, but we're reacting to the behavior. So I teach them to respond to the trauma need. So instead of the, like, what are you doing, to say, like, what does my child need right now? There must be something in them that's making them feel unsafe.
Yeah.
What can I do to rebuild safety and not address the behavior? We can talk about that behavior when they're feeling a little bit safer in an hour, or maybe at bedtime, or whatever it might be. We can talk about the whole scissors safety thing later. But right now, when they're acting out, we must respond as if they're being triggered, and our child is behaving from a heightened, like a trauma response, right? That fight, flight, or freeze. So that really is looking at every behavior as if it's a reaction to trauma, even when it doesn't look like it. And honestly, most of the time it doesn't look like it.
Right.
Most of the time.
There's
um,
one that you didn't hit on, which is fawning, which
yes.
that would be a more subtle one to catch up on, because that child may be more complacent and easy,
uh, yeah.
but to the point they're not getting what they want or expressing it. So there's
Mhm.
flight, flight, freeze, and fawn that are
Yeah.
all trauma responses. And I think that's the one that gets missed sometimes and is a little more subtle, because I discovered that was one of my responses a little later in life that I wish I had known about sooner. But I'm wondering if you come across that too, because I think others
Oh
know
my
about
gosh.
the other ones, but that one is different beast of its own. So
Oh, as a parent raising a child from trauma, that was the one that drove me crazy, right? Because at home, I was seeing the fight or flight. There was not much freezing, lots of fighting and fighting. But then when my son would be with certain people, there was so much fawning. And so what that looks like is, at home, I was seeing all of this pushback and behaviors and aggression and destructive behaviors, all these things. And then my son would go to certain babysitters or certain teachers and be like the perfect student. So complimentary, so polite, so helpful, so like and as mom, then I would often hear, I don't really know what the problem is at home. Your son is a delight. And I'm like, yeah, thank you for saying that I'm the problem. Thank you. That's how my brain processed that. But, but I didn't know about fawning then. I actually just learned about it a couple of years ago. And when I learned about it, I was like, oh my gosh, like, that makes so much sense. So it is becoming more well known as the fourth trauma response, like you said. And when I first read about it, a lot of the information would say that oftentimes somebody who's fawning will fawn their abuser.
Mm.
So if a child is being abused, they're more likely to, like, go over the top and be extra nice and extra kind and helpful and complimentary to the person abusing them. But like with my son and a lot of kids who are in an out of home placement, they're not in that situation anymore. And so they will find other people. And I have no reason to think that the people my son would fawn to were people that he was afraid of. But there was something about his interaction with them that created that type of response. And, before I knew what fawning was, I would often say to those people, they're like, I don't understand what the issue is. And I would say, I'm just really glad he has a place where he can demonstrate, the side of him that people enjoy, that he can get that praise from, because at home, at school, he didn't get a lot of praise, even though I was trying so hard. But it's hard to find those moments and even when I would say like, wow, you did such a great, and it, like, I swear half the sentence would come out and then there would be another behavior mid sentence. So
Yeah.
it almost made it hard to praise him because of the behavior. So yeah, so thank you for bringing up that fawning, because that also can be a clear sign. And I really think kids who've experienced that early complex trauma out of home placements, I really think that the vast majority of the time, if not all of the time, they're in a heightened state of alertness and ready to pounce at any moment, even though it doesn't look like it.
I also think too that they kind of have a skewed identity. As you were talking, I was just thinking about how the reason I fawned was to kind of be a chameleon and meet other people's needs. And so I lost a sense of self in there as a safety mechanism.
Yeah.
Because in my home, I had to show up as whoever they wanted me to be. Who did my parents need me to be today? Did they need me to be the big sister who played with the kids, or did they need me to be the third adult to take care of something because they didn't have time? Or did I need to be the trophy daughter who just accomplished something? Like, I remember bouncing through all of these roles. I mean, they were doing the best that they can, but then I went out into the real world, and realistically, you cannot please everybody.
Yeah.
And you overextend yourself and you do some things. So it can be very detrimental. It seems complimentary at the time. And that's where we see kids who are like the straight A student, and then they have something happen and then they have this like mental health crisis, and you're like, but they were the straight A student. I don't understand. And all of it comes down to this result, the trauma, but it's the identity piece. Somebody didn't want me really has deep scars. And why didn't they want me? And then a brain that's not fully developed as a child or an infant is going to be placing on, well, what was that reason? Why did they leave me? Was it because I wasn't pretty, or was it because I wasn't this, or was it not because I was that? And so fawning is almost this way, I think, of trying to cope with that, of like figuring it out. And when you get the praise and the stuff back, sometimes that's helpful. But I also think too, that abuser piece is really tricky. Like that I need to please you thing, instead of I need to please myself. I need to be true to myself. I need to have my voice. So it's interesting to hear you balancing that, of like letting them tough love you and test your love and honoring that. And then trying to also point out the positive attributes about them in other environments to try to give them that sense of self that's their truth. Because even in some other things that I've read of different personality types or different things, a parent may raise a child that's like a type 1, which is a fun, bouncy child, as a type 3, which is who they are as a parent, which is more of like a go-getter, get things done, checklist person. And so you can grow up kind of under the wrong concept of I'm valued for a checklist instead of I can just be valued for my fun personality, and that's true for me. And I think it's a real interesting identity piece in there of what am I valued for? Why am I loved? Because love went away in a sense. How do I keep it?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so it's so powerful. And I know at the core of kids who've been through such tricky things is that sense of identity. And, oftentimes in adoption too, like you throw in cultural differences, racial differences, that sense of identity is huge. And, yeah, really knowing who they are and trying to figure all of that out it definitely just adds fuel to the fire, really.
But if you're aware of it, you can help cultivate it. And that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think that's helpful in a sense. The more that you're aware and the more that you educate yourself about trauma, I feel like the more power you have because you recognize things. Otherwise, you would just be like the friends that you're talking about. They're like, I don't understand what the problem is. So
Mhm.
um, I think anyone that's out there listening who's an adoptive parent or who is a birth parent or has trauma in their past or as a child that has trauma, that just find hope in there's a lot more coming out about it. There's a lot more tools. There's a lot more ways to get a more positive outcome in the end. But I do think it's up to the individual at some point. You can have kids both from traumatic circumstances. One succeeds and one does not. At some point, it's their internal choice. And so if you feel like you've been the best parent you can be and the outcome wasn't what you wanted, or you did the best thing you knew you could at the time, you have to have some grace for yourself and realize that no parent is perfect. And that doesn't discount the love or the value that you put in that child's life.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And, I think I think my biggest lesson in life, and probably maybe the biggest takeaway that I want from this podcast here, is that you can't discipline a child into overcoming their trauma. You can't structure and routine them into overcoming their trauma. And I feel like I got this mixed message of he needs more structure and routine. Make sure you tell him that you love him, but it was definitely missing that piece of belief. And structure and routine might have helped him. There were some things that I think it helped with in our daily interactions. But at the end of the day, as I've worked on shifting my mindset, our relationship is a complete 180 from where it was a few years ago before I started changing. And he hasn't done anything different. He's just being him, but I'm showing up for him so differently now, and showing up with just pure unconditional love, no matter what he says or does. And our relationship is so different. And so that, I guess, would be my biggest takeaway from our chat today, is that it's not about discipline. It's about not getting so hung up on their behaviors and really just helping them believe, and you yourself believing how much you love them.
And so would you say, as March is about resilient strength, that is your strength? The strength is in the belief. It's more in the internal things and showing up authentically. That is the strength that our children need from us so that they can be resilient and so that we can help them learn the life lessons and still be that strong foundation for them for their entire life. However, we need to show up in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that resilience is all about that belief in a better outcome, belief that, I am lovable. I think that that's where that resilience lies.
Thank you so much. If people want to find you to work with you, where did they find you?
Yeah, so my website and my social handles, I'm not on all the socials because who's got time for that, but
right.
My website is connectedparentswithangie.com, and that's where I'm on Instagram and Facebook. So yeah, come check me out. I do offer a free consult, and I work directly with parents. By my day job, I work with kids, but in my coaching, I work directly with parents because we are the change for our kids.
I love that. We are the change for our kids. Yeah, that supports so much of the podcast today as we support mothers and help them to be resilient to raise the next resilient generation. So thank you for contributing. Thank you, audience, for listening. And we will see you next time. I believe in you, believe in yourself, and God bless.